Yeah, I was really impressed. I had to go back and look at the copyright date of 2015 because you're covering concepts, and maybe it's because just your experiences on campus, but we see coming from the campuses, and now it's almost full blown out in the real world, these concepts of critical race theory and social justice. It's almost that we've transcended or moved past postmodernism into this postmodernism, where we want to have what you cover in here is that you're either a product of your gender, your race, or your class, and it's topics that you really hit really well in Love Thy Body, where you can never rise above your group status. And I was really impressed of reading this the second time. You were channeling the prophetic Schaefer here, I think, by identifying these. And I was really impressed that you kind of identified, here's two areas, social justice and critical race theory, that have come into full blown every person now has heard of that. And so I was really impressed that you identified those.
And that's actually principle number 4, which is, the two tests are, does it fit the real world and does it hold together logically? And again, you can be absolutely certain, you can be confident that it will have a internal contradiction. In fact, the most fatal contradiction of all, which is it undercuts itself. Mm-hmm. See, again, it's because any worldview that defines humans as less than in the image of God is going to also have a lower view of reason. And as a result, well, let's start with materialism, because that's our standby. Yeah. So the materialist says, you don't believe something because you're rationally persuaded it's true. You believe it because of the neurons firing in your brain. To which you say, well, what about materialism itself then?
Yeah.
You don't believe it because you're rationally persuaded it's true, but because the neurons firing in your brain. And so it undercuts itself.
Yeah.
It slits its own throat. There's an apologist named Greg Koukl, who I'm sure you know.
Sure.
He calls this when a worldview commits suicide. It kills itself.
Yeah.
The technical term is self-referential incoherence.
Right.
So you can see why my students prefer to say it commits suicide.
Yeah.
But it's very common with many of the worldviews that are out there today. Let's say Marxism. Marxism is still very popular on college campuses.
Sure.
There's a French political philosopher not long ago who said, nowadays when we want to debate a Marxist, we have to import one from an American university. So how is Marxism reductionistic? Marxism says, you don't believe what you believe because you're rationally persuaded it's true, but because it advances your economic interest, right? Your economic class. Everything's economic, everything's class-oriented, right? Marx said Christianity is the opiate of the people. And what he meant by that is it was invented by the rich and powerful to subjugate the poor. He promises that they will be compensated for their misery in this life by happiness in the afterlife. So the rich are using religion to advance their own economic interests. To which you say, to the Marxist, what about Marx's own theory?
Yeah.
To be logically consistent, he has to apply the theory to itself. So did he come up with it just to advance his own economic interests? In which case, why should the rest of us pay any attention?
Right, right.
So again, it commits suicide.
Yeah, or to act in general, because it seems like any action will then be viewed in a demonstrable way. You're doing this only to advance, and so you shouldn't, or maybe you should. That's where it commits suicide right there is where can you act then? It doesn't seem like doing anything or doing nothing is always the wrong answer then.
That's true. And again, and then you put it back on the person who's saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you reduce rationality to some non-rational cause, then you undercut your own position. So take Freud. How is Freud reductionistic? Freud had an enormous impact on our modern world. And he said, you don't believe what you believe. what you believe because you're rationally persuaded it's true, but because of your psychological history, right? Especially sexual repression. You're a Christian because of your Oedipus complex. Well, to which you would say, what does that say about the origin of your own theory? Onto the couch yourself. And then we come to what you were talking about earlier, postmodernism and deconstructionism. What's its reductionism? It says human rationality is swamped by social forces like race, class, gender, sexuality, and so on. To which you say, well, what about your own theory? Are you just a mouthpiece for your own race, class, gender, sexual orientation? In which case, why should we pay any attention to it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And actually, let me throw one more in there, because a fast-growing movement among scientists is evolutionary psychology.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And again, what's its reductionism? The brain evolved by natural selection, and so did the ideas in our brains. They also evolved, not because of their truth value, but because of their survival value.
Right.
To which you say, what does that mean for your own theory? It's not a matter of truth either. It arose because it was useful for survival.
Yeah.
And, this is actually a standard tool in any philosophical toolbox. So in one sense, this is not new.